Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah,
Not quite. Hang on a sec. Can I do it?
Maybe Jordan, you're not unmute.
It's Alina. Perfect. Thank you. All right, let's continue. So, what was that? Weekly. Thank you. Checking the health of the utilities. So we have a bunch of sort of non-Tableau server utility scripts that are running, different third-party tools that are running. We check their health. We take a minute to prune the inefficient content. So by inefficient, I mean anything that is not really being heavily used, but is consuming a lot of our extract, refresh, backgrounder resources. So if you only have one person looking at a view from a workbook every week and it's spending 10 hours refreshing cumulatively throughout the week, that's not really a good ROI. So we have a chat with that person and review any patches that came out for security. Quarterly, we look at updating drivers on all our hosts, make sure that we're using the latest version of drivers, make sure they're tested beforehand, of course, if we upgrade. We do a stale content cleanup process. Again, we rely heavily on those shareable data sources for the Tableau Server repository, the TS data sources, to identify anything that hasn't been used in the last 180 days. We email those people and let them know, hey, if you don't go look at this or you use it in some fashion, we will automatically archive and delete it for you. And it's worked as a pretty good process for us. And quarterly, we will upgrade to the newest major version of Tableau. We're on a quarterly release schedule. And so that's the cadence with which we upgrade Tableau. We actually upgrade our production server much more often than just quarterly, but that's sort of the cycle, the major release cycle for us. And so that leads us to upgrading Tableau Server. All right, so our quarterly release cycle has many phases to it. And I'm going to kind of give you a simplified version of what that looks like here at Tableau. It's a little known fact that the new naming convention for our releases, so we have the year and then we have a dot and then a number. So instead of 10.6, we came out with 2018.1. The .1 doesn't actually reflect that it was released in Q1. It actually reflects that it was the first release of 2018. So those don't necessarily tie into the quarter it was released in, but we are still on a quarterly release schedule, so it's a little bit confusing. So obviously we have dev building the product and QA QAing the product. They give feedback to dev, we fix bugs, we re-release. So that's one part of the cycle. After I built this, I realized I probably shouldn't have used Brown for the cloud, but I'll probably have to change that in retrospect. So I apologize for that. But this part of the process represents Tableau Online. So the development team at Tableau actually doesn't use the production Tableau server that I maintain. They actually use their own. It was called Alpo Dev. They moved to using Tableau Online because we wanted to make sure that we were experiencing what our customers experience with Tableau Online. We wanted to make sure that we understood what the pain points were, if any, and get those fixed, and make sure that we were eating our own dog food with online. And so we built a vetting cluster pod for Alpo Dev to take early builds from Dev and QA and provide feedback for them prior to rolling out to the rest of the dev team. So that's what Alpo Dev-v next represents, the next version of Tableau Online. Once we've done that and done some validation there, the first beta comes out and is released to customers. During that same phase, we are releasing whatever version of Tableau Online was on Alpo Dev-v next to the actual production version of the Alpo Dev site for Tableau Online, running on their own custom pod. So they've had some refinement, and now all of the development team is using the new build. And so they're the first ones to sort of experience any issues that come out of that and any changes and really understand what we're going to be delivering to in the next beta. So moving on from there, we released beta 2, and that's where we really start to get involved because that's our chance to start testing the new server builds with on-prem. And so we have our separate vetting cluster called Alpo Vet that we will then take the beta 2 builds into and start testing. Once we're satisfied that we've passed all of our vetting tests, we will move into production for our Alpo Tableau server. So that's all of sales and marketing and operations, finance, pretty much everybody else at Tableau. And after several iterations of that, we will actually do the release. So that's kind of what the release cycle looks like in a very compressed form. And obviously it's cyclical because as issues are found, we go back to dev and QA, they build new builds, and we go through many of these stages all over again. So this next portion is going to focus on the actual AlpoVet stuff, because that is where we're really sinking effort into vetting that build and making sure that it's ready to go to roll into production. This is our AlpoVet config. It's very similar to Alpo. It's a little bit less beefy, but it's generally the same configuration. You want things to be essentially the same with your test cluster and your production cluster. It doesn't quite have the same capacity, but it's still got enough resources behind it that we can do some load testing. So starting to do the actual preparation, we have our production cluster up at the top, running all the extracts and all the backgrounders, pointing at the production data warehouse machine. We have our AlpoVet cluster down at the bottom. So that's the cluster we're going to be testing the new build of Tableau server on. We have all of the backgrounders disabled, and it's pointing to the test data warehouse. So the first step is take a backup of our production cluster and restore it to our vetting cluster with the no config parameter. And so what that does is it allows us to get all that content, all the permissions, everything that goes with Tableau server, and restore it to the vetting cluster. Now, if we didn't use no config, it would think that we were basically doing a restore to the same production cluster with the same hosts powering it. And so if we left that out, things would get pretty messed up on the vetting cluster. So whenever you're restoring to a different set of machines, you're going to want that no config parameter. So that means that because we're not restoring the rest of the configuration, you need to make sure in advance that you've got the same settings set up on the vetting cluster, aside from things like the backgrounders being turned off and other custom things that you've done to prepare it. So then we actually point the vetting cluster to a production data warehouse machine. We can do that with a host file redirect. You can also bulk edit connections in the Visportal UI, but when you get past 200 or so, it doesn't really like doing that many updates. So you can do it either way, but host files tend to be the simplest, as long as you remember that you made that change. We'll also point to the local host as the SMTP server. So in Tableau server's configuration, we'll point to the primary itself within the vetting cluster, because that's where we want to do our SMTP trapping and looking at all the subscriptions that come in. So we want to give it a legitimate place to go, but we don't want it to be our actual users. At that point, it's really important that you do some baseline testing. So you don't want to just start upgrading and testing on the new cluster, because you haven't proven that that cluster is actually in a good state prior to the upgrade. And so if you find a bunch of problems, it's not necessarily something that's going to be the fault of the new build. It could just be that your vetting cluster was not set up properly. So do some baseline testing. For us, we turn on our backgrounders, we turn on alerts and subscriptions and refreshes, and they're all pointing to the production box, the production data warehouse. And so that gives us a chance to make sure that everything is as apples to apples as possible. When we're doing tab-jolt tests, we actually don't point to the production box because that's more of a load test than a configuration validation test. So keep that in mind with that bullet point. We don't want to hammer on our production data warehouse. We'll do a bunch of manual viz tests, and we'll basically just make sure that it's behaving in a similar function to the production server. Okay, so once we've done that, we've established a good baseline, we're ready to upgrade, and we do that internally with our TS upgrade py script. So this is just the command prompt that lets us put in the actual Python script and point to an installer. Just put our builds out in the install directory and point it at it, and we're good to go. That's pretty much all you need to do. There's a YAML file you need to configure ahead of time with some information about your environment and sort of where you want things to go, log-wise and and if you're going to zip logs up and all that good stuff. But we've gotten it down to where it's just a one-line call. We just run it and it does the upgrade. It's pretty convenient. So the script actually disables scheduled tasks on the box. According to a naming convention, all our scheduled tasks that run Tableau processes like AD sync and other things like that all start with TS. And so it just looks for all the tasks that begin with TS, it disables them so that we're not running tab command and other tab admin commands during the upgrade process because that can conflict. It'll stop Tableau server, uninstall it, install the new version, and then it runs cleanup a couple of different times actually and starts it back up again. And then it re-enables all those scheduled tasks for us. We don't have to remember how to actually do that. So once we've got it upgraded, it's time to start validating the new build. So one of the first things and one of the key things we look at is, did our extract refreshes succeed? And this is a viz that we built off of one of those Tableau data sources, the Tableau repository database data sources I was talking about earlier. This is based on the TS background tasks data source. We actually have a parameter that we added later in the life of this that will allow us to put in the date of the upgrade, and it will restrict the rows shown to just extracts that were succeeding prior to the upgrade and failed after the upgrade. So it makes it really easy when we've got so many extracts running all the time to just sort of condense it easily into a list for us that we can go through and manually review. And having the data pivoted, having the marks pivoted like this in a timeline-based scenario is, I found, way more effective than the way that the current admin views work, where you kind of have to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling just to see the history for a single extract. So that's been really useful for us. Again, I mentioned using Papercut as an SMTP trap. So all those alerts and subscription emails coming from the vetting cluster are just being rerouted based on the host file redirect to the primary again. And that's where we're running Papercut to go ahead and we can just look at all those subscriptions as they come in, make sure that they look good. Everything's being received the way it's supposed to. I don't tend to go through all of them because we have a lot of subscriptions on Alpo. And so it's more helpful just to see that generally there are no visual problems coming in. Automated viz tests. So again, I said we use vizcrawler instead of tabjolt, but again, they're kind of the same thing. So we run that across the top 1,000 views by popularity. Up above, you can see we've got a bit of a timeline area chart for our different clusters. Alpo A is the production one, B is the failover, and Alpo Vet is our vetting cluster that we're testing on. And so we can click on those marks and we have a dashboard action that just drops the list of all the ones that failed below, and we can review those by the exception they threw, as well as drill into the actual view itself with a URL action hyperlink. So that's been a pretty helpful way that we always go through all those that failed just to make sure that everything's okay. It's been a pretty effective way for us to catch issues. One thing we added, I want to say it was 3 releases ago, that's been even more effective that I've been really happy with, has been an image compare. So it's been a way to basically say, not just did a viz throw an error, but is it visually different from the same viz on the current production version of Tableau Server. It just does require some prep work though. So if you don't get the prep work right, you're going to be reviewing a lot of false positives, and that's no fun. So make sure you're doing this if you choose to go with this vetting approach. So you need 2 test servers, and for us, that's our actual test cluster. So it could be, we actually use the failover cluster for this because it's very similar to production. It's running the same version as our production server, and we don't have any user traffic hitting it, so it's a good place to test. We can mess with that as we see fit. And then below we have our vetting cluster that we're running the new version of Tableau on. So the top one's running our production version of Tableau, and the bottom one's running the new version that we want to test. So we're going to disable the schedules on both. We don't want anything running. We don't want subscriptions. We don't want alerts. We definitely don't want extract refreshes. We want that data to be static. We're going to point both to the production data warehouse because we want them looking at the same exact data. And we want to restore our production backup to both. So we take that backup from production and we restore it to both clusters. So they should have the exact same content that was taken at the exact same time. And for anything live, we're going to be hitting that same data warehouse. So everything should be apples to apples at this point. It is important to disable the schedules on Tableau Server, both clusters, directly after you do that restore, because you don't want, obviously the schedules are running on production. So if you do that restore, they're going to be running on the restored version. So you don't want the extracts refreshing because they can get out of sync and then your data is different. So the vises aren't going to be the same and you're going to get, once again, false positives. So once you've done that and they're all ready to go, we actually use Tableau, hey, of all things, to generate tab command commands to get the images from both our test cluster and our vetting cluster. So we use a tool called Image Magic. It's like, once again, free and open source. You can go and Google it. To compare the images of the two vises. And it reports, it can create both a visual description of the differences as well as some data-based descriptions. So we just literally copy those into Excel and run those commands. And so you get something like this. This is showing you the differences between two different images. And you can see that we've got a circle that's different. And so here's the before. See that same circle is that blue dot kind of in the middle there, that first pane. And then on the next, it disappeared. So for whatever reason, that mark was not in the newer version of Tableau that we were testing. And this is the kind of thing where when you find it, I don't know about you guys, but for me, when I'm doing this kind of testing, I get really excited about it. So this was like 2 fists in the air. Yes, I found one. It's so exciting. The big question I think here is this image comparison something that you as a customer of Tableau should do? And I have kind of mixed feelings about that. I am philosophically opposed to recommending it because I have a lot of pride in our products and I really don't feel like it should be your job to QA our software. That's our job. And so I don't like having to recommend it. However, I will say it is not possible for us to test every combination of viz and data that you all are creating in your own installations of Tableau. It's not something we're able to do because we don't have that data. We don't have those vizzes. We certainly do generate a lot of different kinds of content on our own servers, and we have a very thorough process for catching these. But I won't say that there's nothing you won't ever catch yourself if you run this on your own environment. So I think what I would say is if you have the resources to stand up your own clusters, if you have the person hours to devote to this process, and your environment really is large and you need to make absolutely sure that you're not going to get into a bad situation with any vizzes when you roll this out, when you upgrade to a new version, then I'd say it's probably worth doing. But that's all sort of heavily caveated. For smaller deployments, where it's not such an issue and you don't need to catch that 1 in 1,000 vizzes that might have a slight problem with it, then I would say you probably don't need to worry about this. Most of the stuff that we do catch is slight shifts in position. So a lot of false positives will come up just based on little tiny pixel wide shifts in where a mark appears or where the titles are aligned, labels and things like that. So it's really rare for even us to be able to find a bug this way, but it can give you that peace of mind. Moving on with our vetting steps, looking at Zabbix, this is a picture of our CPU utilization across our cluster. Once again, I will speak the praise of Tableau and being able to unify all this data. It's so much better to look at it here than it is in the native UI for most applications, just because I can align all my hosts together. I can see the trends. We can just catch so much more this way. So up top are our 3 hosts that are devoted to the user experience, which are sort of, if I'm looking at those and I'm seeing lots of red happening, then that means our users are having a bad time. The 3 below are always busy. Those are our backgrounders. So we don't really care if we're smashing those to bits because they're CPU intensive processes that they're running and it's not actually affecting anyone's user experience. So once again, really helpful to look at that history in context, all aligned together. Some of the less visually interesting steps, but still necessary ones that we perform are doing a backup and restore. Make sure you test that. We manually test known critical vises. We have certain ones that many people are using throughout the company, so we just make it a regular habit to go out to those, do some interactions with them, make sure they feel okay, they look okay, they're performing all right. Vis alerts is a process that we still run on our test cluster, not only to make sure that Vis alerts itself is going to work for the next version, but also because it's good as sort of a monitoring tool. It just runs in the background. It's sending stuff out. It works a lot like subscriptions do, but it tests a lot more of the product because it's going through trusted tickets and different kinds of authentication. It's hitting the database, all kinds of stuff. So it's really been a pretty good test for us. We have an internal tool called CrashShark that's monitoring our folders on the Tableau server hosts for any crash dumps that come out. It sends it right to dev. You can't do that one, unfortunately, so we'll do our best to do it for you. And then we'll go in and test embedded vises. So we have embedded vises in Salesforce and in our wiki, just going and making sure that the authentication process is working okay. They look fine, they're loading, all that good stuff. So we are ready to go. This is the worst we can do. Dogs with bees in their mouth, and when they bark, they shoot bees at you. And if you understood that reference, I'd say raise your hand, but it's a WebEx, so you're gonna have to settle for chuckling to yourself quietly and wondering how you got so old. Okay, but really, this is the time where we start letting out our users do some user acceptance testing. So at this point, we've done our internal checks on our vetting cluster. We made sure that Tableau is behaving as we expect. We're ready to start letting users on there and testing out the features that they care about, testing out their own content, and doing a little bit more of an actual usage testing instead of sort of bits and pieces of automated testing. So we'll send an email out to people who own projects, the data stewards, some of our support teams, people who are particularly interested in trying out new features. Sometimes we'll actually go and look at those, look at the usage data for who's doing what. So for example, when Vision Tooltip came out, we looked for people who had customized customized the tooltips heavily. And we reached out to that subset of people and said, hey, we got new Vision Tooltips now. Why don't you go try it on our vetting cluster? So we got a lot more organic usage on our cluster. And it's been pretty helpful to have people have that time to just experience a new version of the product and test for any problems that come up. So we give them about 2 days to do that. People tend to be busy, so you kind of have to, we've had to bug them a bit to get them on there. It's kind of key to communicate with them if you need to do any maintenance on the server. You don't want to take down your vetting cluster while these people are on there. That's not a good situation. So when we tell them to go to it, we usually just tell them go directly to the host itself under an alias. If you want to get fancy, you can use the load balancer to do so, but you don't want to do anything to disturb their production experience. So it's usually easier and safer just point them to the new cluster directly. And this is a pretty important part of the process because whatever other problems or confusion might come up with an upgrade, it's best to get that solved on a small scale, experience that on a small scale first before you actually go out to everybody. So it can be a useful sort of test to find out if anywhere users are confused. That way you can sort of head that off at the pass. You can let people know ahead of time and be prepared for questions or come up with a FAQ or whatever you want to help people sort of easily self-serve if they do have questions when you go to production. Okay, so we are ready to upgrade. Once again, I will extol the virtues of using a checklist. Really helpful. Notifying your users, obviously, most of you should be aware of, have some process for this, letting people know that, hey, we're going to do the upgrade. We like to use the coming soon page that Tableau has on the main website to help people understand what new features are coming with this upgrade. What kind of things are they actually going to get? And get them excited about it, because you can make this fun. You put in a lot of work as the server admin on testing this. You should have some pride that your users are going to get something really good out of it, and they're going to get something that works. Prior to actually upgrading the production server, we'll upgrade our failover server the day before. So the nice thing about that is it gives us a way to finally smoke test, just one final test of running through the upgrade in a very production-like environment, and then practice that restore from the production server to our failover server one more time. Because once we upgrade production, that failover process, that backup and restore process, is not going to work to an older version. So in some sense, that failover has to come first anyways. Obviously, you're going to want to take that last backup just for the upgrade. Yes, the uninstaller can take the backup for you, but we like to do it ahead of time, and then we use the PG only flag in the tab admin settings, just so we can avoid having to do a full backup. And this helps us decrease the amount of time we spend doing maintenance, and allows us to get that backup beforehand. And yeah, don't lose that. And last, perform the upgrade and profit. So if you're us, this is only the end of a single instance of this cycle. Typically after this, we will upgrade, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 more times. So we will go through this process, most of this process again and again and again, before we actually release it to customers. So I hope that makes you feel better about our QA cycle and sort of how we use our own products at Tableau to help make your lives better. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. So we can open it up to Q&A.
Awesome, awesome. Matt, there are quite a few questions already there in the QA.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Are you to read? Right now, it probably is easier just go read one and answer them.
All right, I'll do my best here.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think you guys can not see this, I don't think. Let me switch my...
Are you able to see the QAs?
Let me just pull this up here. Can you guys see this QA now?
Yeah, we see a slice, but I don't think.
Oh, I don't see the actual QA. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just read them off then, I suppose.
That works too.
How on your DR site do you individually shut down data server and subscription? We have the entire environment down. We don't shut down data server. You might mean extract refreshes, I think. We shut down, there's actually a config value for shutting down subscriptions and data-driven alerts. I can share that in the community site afterward. For extract refreshes, I'm not aware of one that actually stops those. So for us, we manually just stop all the schedules on the server. We don't turn the entire environment off, but we will disable all the schedules. At times, we have also manually killed all the background tasks with an admin script, just to get rid of them. Where are the data sources that are being shared? I will share that link in the community post where the recording is posted. But there on the community, if you search for shareable data sources for Tableau server, you will, in Google, it'll be the first thing that pops up. I get the failing over to DR, but how do you fail back? Docs say a full reinstall is needed, or at least they did the last time I looked. So that's a good question. I should have mentioned that on the failover server, we don't allow publishing. So we use the tabadmin 80 sync call to synchronize our Active Directory groups. And in that, we demote everybody from publisher to interactor. So nobody actually has publisher rights on our failover cluster. So when people are using it, we have a custom logo that specifically informs users this is a read-only copy. So they shouldn't expect to be able to publish anything to it.
So Matt, let's talk this a little bit more.
Yeah.
Which means during your upgrade, your data is also a little bit older.
So we keep the extract refreshes running on the failover server. So the extracts themselves are up to date. However, your point is, you're right, Mark, in that since the time you took the backup to when users are on there, their content is only going to be as up to date as that last backup. So if they published a new version of a workbook or a new version of a data source, those new versions are not going to be there. And so they are backtracking a bit in time, and that gets worse for however long your backup and restore process takes. Back in the day when we started doing this, it took about an hour plus a half to restore. And so it was a pretty short window. We were able to get it. Now we're up to 10 hours and 6 hours respectively. And so it's a little bit more of a latent situation now. You could potentially...
that's my number one pain point, because for me, it's 11 hours backup, almost 12 hours restore. So it's kind of 24 hours still data.
Right.
Although I do keep extract refresh on during the upgrade. But the workbooks, users, users means the additional user syncing, whatever, publishing also have to stop. Other than extracts, I stop all the rest.
Right.
Sounds like similar.
Yeah. Yep. So that's still a challenge. We haven't had it affect people so much that we've had complaints about it yet, but it is something we're going to need to look more at as we get bigger. Moving on to Jeff's. Why do you have a TS80 sync when it's built into Tableau Server Admin Portal? That's a great question. So the AD sync process, syncing Active Directory groups into Tableau Server, is part of the product. You don't need separate scripts for it. However, the way that we've chosen to manage our permissions has required creating custom AD groups and syncing them on a different cadence than our larger groups. So we have specific groups that are created for every project that we have on Tableau Server. We actually delegate ownership of those groups to the owners of the project. So that means that the owner of the project can actually make changes to the group in Active Directory, not in Tableau Server. That doesn't let you do that unless you're an admin. But in Active Directory, the project owner can make those changes. And so we want them to be able to make those changes and have them pick up fairly quickly thereafter. So we need to run those groups and sync those up with Tableau every half hour or so. Whereas if we need to provision new users by syncing up our all Tableau employees group, bigger org, sales and marketing and that kind of thing, those changes don't need to happen as quickly. So we have two different cadences that those run on. We also have syncs that remove admin privileges from people who are not in the admin group, just to make sure that we're actually enforcing who actually is an admin on Tableau Server. So we get a little fancier than the product will allow us to. That's the answer to that. All right, next question. How do you get around the lengthy times taken for writing backup and restoring? In large part, we don't. We are stuck with that issue. One thing that we do is regular content cleanups. So we help keep the size down and thus the amount of time it takes down by cleaning up content on a quarterly basis. We remove probably about 10 to 20% of our content each time we do that. So there's not an insignificant chunk that gets removed every time. But by and large, that is still going to be an ongoing challenge for us. One thing that we might do is, really the solution for us is going to be moving to Tableau Online, because that is the destination for us in the near future. And so a lot of the admin tasks that I provided are actually going to be going away for us. Thankfully, we don't have to look at hosts. We don't have to worry about all that stuff if we're on Tableau Online. And likewise, we won't have to worry about failover, because Tableau Online doesn't have to take any downtime when they upgrade. So that's going to be nice. But in the meantime, I don't have a great solution for you for lengthy times, other than trying to make your content as efficient as possible and getting rid of all the cruft as much as you can. It also helps to keep the repository database on the primary host as well as file store process. That will help speed up backup times, because it doesn't have to copy all those files from one node of the cluster to another. It can take them all locally. So that can help. Having faster disks can help. I think we got 20 to 30% improvement in backup times when we went from SATA disks to SSD disks. So there's different approaches, but I don't have a silver bullet for you.
Yeah, Matt, I concur that. Based on what I did, it costs for me 25% of time, backup time. Although nice. It does require additional license for the primary node, if you do so.
Right, if you're running a light primary, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're running file store, yeah. True, good point. Okay, next we have upgraded our Tableau cluster in high availability environment. After this upgrade, file store process keeps synchronizing. We are unable to take the backup because of this file store process. Is there any way to set the file store in active state? We have 1 primary and 4 worker node file stores synchronizing in all the nodes since last upgrade. I don't have an answer for that. I would work with the support team on that. That sounds like something they should investigate. Is there a way yet via the APIs to disable all schedules? Oh, good question. I've been looking at the REST APIs a lot lately, but I can't say if you can disable a schedule with the API. I want to say no, but I'm not 100% sure. The API reference page will tell you definitively one way or the other because it's always up to date with whatever the latest version has. Do you image compare every viz or just the top 1,000? I actually had a note to mention this and I totally forgot to mention it, but